My name is Ava Rios, and at 20 years old, I realized my roommate wasn't just petty. She was actively trying to end the life I'd been building class by class, lab by lab. I should have been relieved after a long study day. The kind of bone-deep relief that comes when the dorm elevators finally sigh open and you can kick off wet sneakers and breathe. Instead, I felt the kind of cold that starts behind the ribs and moves outward until your fingers shake. Tessa stood under the humming fluorescent strip in Hawthorne Hall's third-floor corridor, the light cutting a harsh line across her cheekbones, and said, very softly, so only I would hear, "I'll destroy your future." The words were almost tender, like a secret, and in that moment, I realized she wasn't a bad week or a misunderstanding. She was a pattern I had ignored because it was easier to believe we could get along than to admit my roommates saw me as something to break. If you've ever felt humiliated or dismissed by someone who should have been neutral at worst and supportive at best, hit that like button right now and subscribe to join thousands of people who know what it's like when the ground you live on, your home, your classroom, your supposed safe spaces, starts to tilt. Your support means everything as I share what happened next. Not because clicks fix anything, but because stories like mine are too common and too often swallowed. Let me tell you how this all started. I'm a sophomore at Briarwood State University in Columbus, Ohio, majoring in conservation biology, because 11-year-old me who read books about vanished animals never stopped asking why we let them vanish. My semester anchor is Conservation Genetics 2011, a course that smells like ethanol, and old plastic and possibility. I work 10 hours a week in the natural history lab as part of my work study, refilling pipette tip boxes, labeling vials, and learning more from listen and watch than any syllabus could promise. I've got a 3.8 GPA and a $15,000 merit scholarship that, along with my paycheck and the ritual of buying used whenever possible, makes college doable. This spring, my textbooks, lab manual, and ebook licenses totaled $1,120, a number I wrote on an index card and taped inside my desk drawer, the way some people tape affirmations. Numbers focus me. They remind me that my goals live in budgets and calendars as much as in dreams. I live in Hawthorne Hall, in a double with a split common area we share with another double. My side of the room is a small kingdom of corkboard and dried plant pressings, and a lamp with a warm bulb that I carry from dorm to dorm like a moving sun. My roommate is Tessa Klein, a communications major whose voice seems amplified by the world itself. When she laughs, you hear it down the hall. When she posts, people reply. When she wants something, doors tend to open, and if they don't open fast enough, she's good at making it look like they should have. There are things you learn about yourself once you leave home. I learned that I am good at being alone, but better with a handful of anchors. Nia, my best friend since freshman move-in, who studies biomedical engineering and writes reminders on the back of her hand. Luis, our RA, who keeps a tiny toolbox in his backpack and a bigger one for people's nerves. And Dr. Maya Chen, my mentor, whose office smells like coffee and vitrified wood, who believes research integrity is a muscle you train, not a virtue you are born with. My parents, Elena and Daniel, love me the way people love while counting bills twice. My mom is a front desk receptionist at a dental clinic. My dad drives for a courier service, the route's long enough that he texts me pictures from small Ohio towns whose water towers look like upside-down teacups. They are proud but practical. Science to them is a good interest, the way gardening is a good interest if it feeds you. They ask about my classes, but want to know about hours and wages and how I'm budgeting for bus fare. I'm the first in the family to live on campus. No siblings to split a room with or to call for borrowed hoodies. Some nights I miss the creak of our old apartment's radiator that sounded like it was whispering to itself. Some nights I'm grateful my world now is the sound of someone else's Spotify through the bathroom wall. There were always little things with Tessa. Freshman year, she said the lab key cards made you guys feel special. Like the point of science was exclusivity and not method. Sophomore fall, she started borrowing my printer credits with a breezy, "I'll Venmo later," then forgot. She called my poster topic, Extinct Equid Subspecies Dynamics. the nerdy horse-zebra thing, which would have been funny if she didn't wield it like a blade. What really mattered was timing. This spring, I'm building a poster called What Really Happened to the Quagga, a case study in historical DNA and extinction narratives, because I am obsessed with how stories end and how data reframes endings. The quagga wasn't a separate species, but a southern African subspecies of the plains, zebra, with a coat that seemed to phase from dark stripes to pale brown until the hindquarters looked almost solid. People photographed a few in European zoos in the late 1800s and kept mislabeled bones in drawers. People hunted them. People let grasslands fragment. People wrote eulogies late and then moved on to other animals. I wanted to show that what we choose to say really happened depends on which records we protect and which we lose. I told Tessa that once. She blinked in that way she did when she was choosing between mocking and understanding, and went with, "Sounds like something only 3 people will care about." But this isn't a story about whether your roommate thinks your major is cool. It's a story about what happens when someone decides your future is optional and keeps testing the doors that keep your life together. It started, plainly, with a key card. We're not supposed to lend lab access. It's written into our training modules and re-emphasized in the white-on-blue, authorized personnel-only sign that you stop seeing until you remember what it's trying to keep out. Not just the wrong hands, but liability. Tessa asked to borrow my card to film a segment for her comms class on behind the scenes at a university lab. She said, just some B-roll of pipettes and blue light and science-looking things. I told her I couldn't. The first time she pouted theatrically, the way you do when you're playing to a laugh track. The second time she told me I was being weirdly territorial. The third time, April 12th, 2023, 10:18 p.m., the hallway echoing with someone's laughter 2 doors down. She leaned in so close I could smell her citrus hair product and said very gently, "If you don't learn to share, I'll destroy your future." I wish I could tell you she was shouting or obvious. I wish I could say she performed so there'd be witnesses. But Tessa is smarter than loud. Her voice was a private cut, a thing you can't hold up later without sounding dramatic. She didn't say she would physically harm me. She said she'd end a future I hadn't yet earned. I laughed, or thought I did, a little sound that tried to be disbelief and failed. My throat tightened around the air like I'd swallowed a coin. "You don't mean that," I said, still trying to keep us in the land of roommate squabbles and RA mediations. She smiled. "I mean, you'll wish you played nice." And then she pivoted away, a dance turn I'd seen in 100 videos, her ponytail flicking the kind of line a stage light would love. She left the hallway smelling like expensive soap and something electric, like before a storm. I stood there under the humming light, my keychain heavy in my fist, and thought of every policy phrase I'd ever checked off in a training. Misuse of access, chain of custody, report irregularities immediately. Then I thought of how ridiculous I felt picturing myself at Luis's door saying, "My roommate said a sentence, and now my heart is racing." Back in our room, the window was cracked an inch and the damp April air crept in. Our desks faced opposite walls. Mine under the corkboard forest of index cards and annotated printouts. Hers under a neon sign that said, "On air," and a ring light the size of a small moon. Tessa was at her vanity, blending eyeshadow though it was late, phone propped to catch the tutorial. I sat and wrote because writing makes noise into shape. In my notebook I copied the time, 10:18 p.m. I wrote the sentence exactly as she said it. I drew a little box next to it, like, the boxes next to my lab tasks. Order new nitrile gloves, recalibrate the vortex, check the -80 inventory. My pen hovered. I made another box and wrote, record everything. I was thinking of the guy in our dorm last year who swore his suite mate was selling his textbooks online, and how nobody did anything until he produced receipts. Literally receipts, screenshots with order numbers, and a time-stamped photo of a book on the mailroom counter. I was thinking of Dr. Chen saying after a seminar on research ethics, documentation isn't paranoia. It's respect for the truth. I didn't own fancy surveillance. I had a phone filled with voice memos of birds and a cheap pen I'd bought online last fall because I thought the clip looked sturdy. I checked the listing and realized the model I had seen, Note Pro Audio, was actually $39, but there was a no-brand version on special for $29. The shipping estimate put it at 2 days, 3 if the warehouse was backed up. My chest felt tight again. I opened voice memos and began a new file labeled April 12th Hallway, Post-Study. I narrated exactly what she'd said, in a voice that shook too much for my liking. I let the memo run even when I was done, a silence I thought might catch something by accident. Tessa hummed along with whatever video she was watching, a melody I couldn't place. After a moment, she said without turning, "You good? You look pale." I looked at myself in the mirror we shared, my reflection ghosted in the corner of her frame. "Long study day," I said. "Genetics problem set fried my brain." She smiled into her own eyes. "You should take communications. We get to talk about people, not genes." Then, like a punchline only she could hear, she added, "People are easier." I didn't sleep early. I flicked through my calendar instead. In 2 weeks was the department poster session. In 3 weeks, I had the Skype interview for a paid summer position with the Rockridge Wildlife Institute, where undergrads rotated through field, wet lab, and data analysis. It felt like the first rung of the ladder I'd been building since the day I did the school science fair with a cardboard diorama of a marsh and a title in block letters, "Why Frogs Matter." I thought of the $1,120 I'd spent at the start of the term, and how much of that had been swiped on a card I kept in a little zippered pouch. I thought of our shared utilities portal and the way Tessa had suggested I set up autopay so we don't forget. I thought of warning signs like trash you pass every day until one day you stoop to read the label. Missing food. A stack of lab notes shifted from the left side of my desk to the right, printer credits that drained faster than they should have. I told myself I could still choose denial. Then I clicked Buy Now on the no-brand pen mic and fell asleep to the sound of rain tapping the metal lip of the screen like impatient fingers. The morning was the color of unpolished steel. I woke to my alarm at 6:45 a.m. and the awareness that Tessa had already left. A swirl of grapefruit body mist lingering. My phone had a new message in the suite group chat. From her, a selfie with 2 other girls on our floor, captioned, "We run on caffeine and dreams." I typed, "Good luck on your quizzes," and packed my bag with the ritual I use to make days behave. Laptop, lab notebook, USB drive labeled Quagga Poster VE3, the index card with my day's must-dos. Run gel images by Dr. Chen for layout. Email Bursar about a weird line item from last week's utilities. Buy more pushpins. At Kincaid Library, the front tables were full of people wearing the face you get when your brain is already in the exam room. So I took the back booth and spread out. The poster draft glowed on my screen, my chosen headline an echo of the questions I'd had since I was a kid. What really happened to the quagga? The answer was a chorus, not a single voice. Unequal power, habitat change, economics, and the way storytelling hardens into history. By 10, I was in the natural history lab, tying my hair into a knot, pulling on gloves and letting the chill of the place settle my nerves. Dr. Chen was at the bench, pipetting with the ease of someone whose hands have learned this dance so well they could do it in the dark. "Morning, Ava," she said, eyes flicking to the gel tray I slid onto the counter. "How's the poster coming?" I told her about the new layout, the way I'd rearranged the timeline to shift the Boer War farther from the population graphs so the eye wouldn't make connections the data didn't support. She nodded with that precise approval that makes you stand taller. "Good. Narratives are gluey," she said. "Our job is to keep them from sticking to things they shouldn't." Then, softer. "You look tired." I was supposed to say, "Studying." Instead, I said, "Roommate stuff." Her mouth tightened just enough to show she had lived in shared spaces once too. "Document it," she said, as if she were telling me to seal a sample. "And if anything touches your coursework, come to me immediately and CC the department chair." I had two classes, ecology and statistics. Then a work-study hour where I restocked tip boxes and refilled the ethanol bottle that always seems to run out at the same time each week. In the dining hall at Maple Commons, the salad bar had a bowl of cherry tomatoes so glossy they looked lacquered. Nia pushed hers to the side of her plate and said, "Tell me you fueled your brain and not just your anxiety." I told her about the hallway, about the sentence that threaded my day like a new stitch that didn't match the fabric. Nia's eyes sharpened. "That's not a joke," she said. Voice level low the way people go serious in public. "That's a chemical spill warning. You don't ignore that because no one's coughing yet." I showed her the voice, memos file. I didn't play it, I only showed the list, the little waveform bar next to the date. "Good," she said. "Also, install a cloud backup. Also, write down every time she's come near your stuff." I smiled because the advice felt like me reflected back. "Already started." She reached for the last tomato. "You're not crazy," she said, chewing like staking a claim. "Just so you're clear." Back in the room mid-afternoon, the light was kinder. A square of warm gold on the carpet, dust motes like bubbles in a cheap snow globe. Tessa was sprawled on her bed in leggings, scrolling, a second phone face down beside her. "How's Lab Barbie?" she asked without looking up. I unpacked slowly, letting the noises of paper and zipper sink into the air like pebbles in water. "Fine," I said. "We're adjusting figure placement." She made a little dismissive pop with her mouth. "You know, you should think about how to make your stuff more accessible. Like your poster titles sound like science papers, not TikTok hooks." I thought of the sentence that opened my draft and wanted to ask what hook would be enough to sell a dead animal's quiet disappearance. I didn't ask. "I'll keep that in mind," I said instead. She flipped onto her stomach, chin on her hands. "So, are you going to be reasonable about the lab footage?" The air in my chest seemed to thin. "I can't," I said steady. "You know I can't." She stared a beat too long, then smiled slowly like someone tasting a bitter thing and deciding whether to pretend it's sweet. "You'll change your mind," she said. "You've got, what, a scholarship? People like you can't afford to be difficult." That night I set my phone to record again, voice low, telling the day back to myself. I described Tessa's words. I described the way she had looked at my side of the room as if it were a land she'd marked on a map. I described the shape anxiety makes, how it's like trying to carry a bowl to the sink without spilling and someone keeping pace beside you, bumping your elbow. I saved the file and backed it up to my drive. Then I opened a new document, titled it Incidents, and started a table. Date, time, location, what happened, witnesses, evidence, audio, text, year, and physical. Notes, 4/dating 12/10:18 p.m., hallway, direct threat. I'll destroy your future, NA for witnesses, but I made a note. Laughter, 2 doors down at the time. 4/13, 3:22 p.m., dorm room. Repeated requests to borrow keycard, NA, memo of post-conversation. I added older things too, the ones I'd brushed off as annoying. March 27th, printer credits used without permission, estimated 40 pages. March 30th, drawer found unlocked with lab notebook moved. 4/2, utilities portal switched to autopay per her suggestion. Confirm whose name on late notices. As I typed, the noise in my head settled into rows and columns, not because the problem shrank, but because it now had edges. The pen mic arrived 2 days later, a padded envelope that looked too light to hold anything of consequence. The device itself was cheap and plasticky, the clip a little loose, the LED too bright. I charged it while I read the PDF of our student conduct code because I am the person who reads PDFs. Misuse of access, check. Harassment and intimidation, defined in language that tried to encompass the flexibility of human malice. Evidence guidelines, advisory, not prescriptive. Audio recordings in shared spaces where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy can be considered. I chewed that phrase like a seed hull. Reasonable expectation of privacy. Our hallway, number our shared room. Sometimes, the bathroom. No, obviously not. I made another table, where I could record and where I couldn't. What to do if I caught something. Who to tell first. The list calmed me less than I'd hoped because now I could see the work ahead. Staying careful, staying precise. The first time I clipped the pen to my hoodie and left our room, I felt like I had written a secret on my skin. I went down to the laundry at 9 p.m. because that was when people were either studying hard or pretending to, and the machines were usually empty. The room smelled like warm cotton and the last person's detergent. I loaded my clothes with a coin-counting focus that felt like prayer. When the washer kicked on, I leaned against the wall and watched the small round windows spin. Footsteps. Tessa's voice, bright and broadcast ready even without a camera. Oh my God, Ava, you do laundry like a grandmother. I turned. She was with Marissa from 3B, both holding baskets they didn't put down. I smiled like a person who is fine. It's laundry, I said. There's no young way to do it. Marissa laughed, the kind of laugh people give to signal allegiance. Tessa shifted the basket to her hip, like a mic to her mouth. So, she said. About the lab. I shook my head. No. She pouted. I just want 5 minutes in there. I'm not going to touch anything. I thought of pipette tips and sample logs and the way 5 minutes can be enough to unspool months of work. It's not my space to share, I said. She looked like she was deciding whether to escalate in front of Marissa. She chose a different path. You know, she said lightly, if you weren't so weird about territory, people wouldn't keep thinking you're hiding something. She deposited the sentence like a seed and left. The pen recorded the hum of the washers, my breath catching, and the tiny disloyal sound I made that might have been a laugh and might have been a sob. I walked back up the stairs with the odd, buoyant feeling documentation gives you, even when what you've documented is awful. It's the feeling of proof growing in your pocket like a small, hard stone. In the suite, our suite mates were on a video call, headphones in, oblivious to me and my stone. I set my phone to upload the audio and opened my incidents document. Entry made. I felt like a clerk at my own trial. Later, in bed, I texted Nia. Got a pretty clear recording of her pressuring me in the laundry. Also decided to do formal voice memos after key conversations. She replied with a sticker of a lawyer cat and then, proud of you. Also, remember to tell Luis sooner rather than later so it's on record. He doesn't need to take sides. He needs a paper trail. I said I'd go tomorrow after class. Then I lay there listening to the corridor outside, the soft thunder of dorm life, and thought of the quagga, an animal partly erased by paperwork and partly by how easy it is to not look at a thing when money wants you not to. I thought of how history punishes the quiet. I promised myself, out loud in the dark, that I would not be quiet. The next day, the sky was the color of notebook paper. In ecology, we graphed logistic growth, the line flipping from gentle to steep like a switch. I thought of how trouble can look like that too. A long flat of small slights and then a sudden vertical that makes you dizzy. After class, I knocked on Luis's door. He opened with his usual gentleness, the room behind him smelling like ramen and pine. Hey, Ava, he said, eyes scanning my face the way RAs learn to do. You want to come in? I stepped into the RA version of a studio. Small couch, RA handbook on the shelf. Poster that said, civility is a shared project. I told him what Tessa had said in the hall. I told him I'd begun recording interactions because I wasn't sure where this would go, and I wanted to have something beyond my word. He nodded, slow. Okay, he said. Thank you for telling me early. I'm going to make a note. Date, time, summary. That way, if we need to, we can show a pattern. He tapped his keyboard, the sound clean and administrative. I'm not an investigator, he reminded me. If anything crosses into conduct code violations, harassment, theft, sabotage, we'll elevate. But I'm glad you came. Also, if you want, we can talk about a room change. I shook my head almost too fast. Not yet, I said, which was truer than it sounded. I liked my side of the room. I didn't want to hand Tessa the victory of my displacement. I also didn't want to leave my books and drafts to a space I couldn't monitor. All right, Louise said. Then be careful. Keep me posted. And if anything happens that touches your academics, email me and CC student conduct same day. I left his room feeling like I'd placed a flag on a map I didn't want to draw. There was a comfort in knowing the date, and time lived somewhere besides my notebook. Still, a voice in my head whispered that all I'd done was file a complaint against a storm. I had a lab shift then, and the lab is a temple for someone like me. You enter, you wash your hands, you put on gloves, you follow steps. The fridge doors suction, thump. The bright fields of the bench tops, the tiny vortex that whirls a tube until the liquid at the bottom becomes a small, perfect tornado. These are rituals that make me feel like a person doing something real. While I labeled vials, Dr. Chen asked a question about my methods section, and I answered cleanly. The way you answer when everything you love is under attack and you are trying not to show it. She didn't push. At the end of the shift, she handed me a stapled packet. Here, she said, poster session guidelines. Also, if you need an extra hour in the lab next week, we can arrange it. The kindness made something in my chest loosen dangerously. Thank you, I said, and it came out too soft. By the end of the week, the stone in my pocket had become a handful. There was the laundry exchange. There was an afternoon in the common area when Tessa told two girls on our floor that some people were weirdly secretive about basic student life, then looked straight at me when she said, which makes you wonder what they're doing with all that alone time. There was a night in our room when she stood in front of my desk while I was at the library and filmed a joke video about crime scenes of academic obsession, the camera panning over my corkboard. I didn't know about that one until a friend DM'd me the clip. I saved it. I screen recorded the comments in case she deleted them. I wrote the time down. When she came in that night, I asked her not to film my side of the room. She smiled with her mouth, not her eyes. It was a joke, she said. You of all people should know how to take things lightly. I didn't tell her that my hands were shaking so hard I had to set my water glass down. The pen at my collar caught the sound of the glass touching wood. Evidence, the soft click of trying to be okay. What I wanted most was for things to go back to normal. Then I thought about what normal had been and wondered why I wanted it. In statistics, we learned about confirmation bias and how the human brain loves to see what it expects. I started watching myself for it. I wrote "assume nothing" on a sticky note and stuck it to the inside of my laptop where only I could see. I tried to imagine I was a separate person observing me. Her day begins at 6:45. She drinks coffee only on exam weeks. She returns library books 2 days early. She wants people to understand how much she cares, but doesn't always know how to show it without sounding earnest in a world that treats earnestness like a bruise to poke. The observer would also note that she didn't go home much because the trip ate a full day and a round-trip bus ticket, and because when she did go home, her parents' questions, loving and heavy as quilts, made it hard to breathe. How many jobs will your degree even get you? My dad asked over Christmas, like he was asking about the weather. Enough, I said, like I was reading forecast only I could see. One evening near the end of that week, I walked into our room to find Tessa and two girls perched on her bed, the ring light on, the silver moon blazing. They were talking about finals content like it was a TV season finale. Genetics, Tessa said to the camera, is a class where they make you memorize 50 acronyms and then gaslight you into loving it. The girls laughed on cue. My roommate, she added with a glossy smile, is actually in love with acronyms. Aren't you, Ava? The lens swung toward me like an accusing eye. I stood there with my backpack still on my shoulder, aware of how my mouth moved before words did. I'm in love with systems, I said, which sounded pretentious out loud but felt true. And with data that doesn't lie. She lowered the phone a half inch. We looked at each other across the boundary of the light. Everything lies, she said, softly enough that the mic might not catch it. You just have to tell a better story. That night I lay awake and repeated her sentence in my head until it felt like gum I'd chewed past flavor. Everything lies. In the morning, I printed a second copy of my poster draft and slid it under my mattress because the hiding felt like a ritual as old as dorms. I sent the file to my cloud drives with two-factor authentication. I tightened the screws on my desk drawer so the slide made a tiny squeak I would hear if someone opened it. I walked to the mailroom and picked up a padded envelope of pushpins I didn't remember ordering but must have because the order confirmation sat in my inbox. I stuck a row of pins along my corkboard like a fence. I told myself this was overkill. I told myself overkill is how some bridges stay standing. And then, because life doesn't pause for the part of your story that wants to be chaptered neatly. I had a great day. In lab, the gel came out crisp, the bands clean, the image good enough to use in the poster. Dr. Chen said, "Nice," and slapped the bench once with joy. In the dining hall, the soup tasted like an actual vegetable. On the quad, someone played guitar badly in a way that made me grin, because it meant someone still believes practice works. The blue sky above Kincaid Library looked like it had been ironed. I let the day's small wins line up in a row, like coins, and I felt rich. I went back to the room with that little clink in my pocket and set my backpack down and took a deep breath because today, for once, I didn't need to be on guard. Tessa was at her desk with her second phone in her hand. "We need to talk," she said. The clink in my pocket vanished. She didn't wait for me to answer. "I emailed Professor Dwyer about filming in the lab," she said. "I CC'd you." He didn't reply. My skin went hot with a very specific dread because Professor Dwyer is our department chair and a person whose inbox is a city. "You emailed the chair about access to a lab you're not in," I said, keeping my voice even. She shrugged. "It's a communications project. It's good PR for your department. People love science content when it's pretty. I could make you look accessible." Her eyes flicked to my poster draft on the corkboard, a glance as quick as a blade. "Don't," I said. She smiled, showing me she knew what the word "don't" sounds like when someone has already pushed their luck. "You really want to be that girl?" she asked, stretching the word "that" until it snapped. "The one who says no until people stop asking and start wondering." I looked at her and felt something align inside me, like clicking a lens into focus. "Yes," I said. "I want to be the girl who says no to rules that keep us safe being treated like suggestions." She laughed. "Have fun with your little zebra then," she said, sweetness spilling like syrup. "I hope your poster is waterproof." I don't know if she meant it the way she would mean it later. I don't know if the sentence was a premonition or a coincidence. What I know is that I opened my laptop to check email and saw a weird notification from the utilities portal and made a note to follow up. I saw no reply from Professor Dwyer because of course there wasn't one. I saw a DM from a floormate that said, "Hey, is everything okay?" with a screenshot of a group chat where my name had become a shorthand for uptight. I saved the screenshot and closed my eyes until the room stopped tilting. It would have been easier to give up then, to decide that the world rewards the girls who smile and go along, to decide that the future I wanted could survive a little bending. But there are moments your life writes itself in ink. I saw my poster headline in my mind, the question pulsing. What really happened? Not the version told later, after the damage, after the facts get rearranged to flatter the survivors. The version told while it happens, while you still have a chance to keep the record straight. I reached for the pen at my collar and felt the cheap plastic bite my fingers. I turned it on. I said, "Date, April 14, 4:52 p.m., dorm room," and described the conversation in a voice as flat and bare as a lab note. I said it all into the air like a spell that keeps a door from slamming. There is a corner of campus behind Kincaid where the path dips and the trees make a green tunnel. I walked there after dinner and let the quiet press around me. In my pocket, a handful of small stones, audio files, screenshots, times. I thought of Dr. Chen's hands steady even when the sample tube slipped. I thought of my parents, who would not know what to do with this story, but would be furious that anyone threatened the money we didn't have to replace. I thought of the moments I had let slide because I wanted to be liked. I let myself be angry in the clean way that doesn't scatter, the way that points like a compass. Then, I opened my phone and wrote an email to myself with the subject, "If I forget," and attached the latest audio, the screenshots, the incident table. I CC'd my non-university account and my cloud folder. I wrote one line: "If you are reading this, keep going." When I got back to the room, Tessa was on a call with her ring light on low, bathing the space in a soft white that made everything look more expensive. She saw me and ended the call. "I was thinking," she said, as if we were planning a picnic. "If you don't want to give me your key card, you could at least leave your door open sometimes. It would be good for your brand to not seem so closed off." Brand. The word made my mouth taste like metal. "My brand is passing my classes," I said. She smiled like someone who knows the script better than you. "Suit yourself," she said. "Just remember, people who say no too often get remembered for the wrong reasons." She turned back to her mirror and brushed highlighter onto her cheekbones, as if drawing battle lines. I lay in bed that night and counted my breath because I couldn't count anything else. The dorm hummed, showers, laughter, the miracle of so many lives stacked in one building and somehow not collapsing. Somewhere a guy yelled, "Bro!" and 3 other guys yelled, "Bro!" back like birds calling at dusk. I let my anger sit on the chair like a coat. I let my fear curl up at the foot of the bed like a cat. I promised both I would carry them tomorrow, but not tonight. Tomorrow I would go to the bursar and ask why there was a line item I didn't recognize. Tomorrow I would stop by. Dr. Chen's office hours with a draft of my figure captions and a question about where to place the narrative box about the 1883 date on the last wild quagga sighting. Tomorrow I would loop Luis in on the utility thing, so the paper trail didn't start and stop with me. Tomorrow I would back up my files again because redundancy is how you survive both lab work and people like Tessa. Just before I fell asleep, I heard her voice through the wall, close enough to be in the room, far enough that I couldn't make out the words. I rolled onto my side and stared at the small blue dot of the power strip. The pen on my desk was charging, a red LED beating like a patient heart. Somewhere not far away, a printer spat out pages for someone else's tomorrow. Somewhere in the building, a phone vibrated with a notification that would matter for 5 minutes and then not at all. In our room, the air was still. The kind of still that comes just before a door opens. I pulled the blanket up and thought, with a steadiness that surprised me, that I was ready to be someone who didn't look away. I didn't know then what exactly would be taken, or broken, or forged. I didn't know what part of my story would have to become evidence. I only knew the next morning I would wake up, press record, and that the first thing I discover was how quickly little lies turn into plans when no one is watching. How by lunchtime, without even realizing it yet, I would already be standing at the edge of the first real cut. The next morning, I woke with the strange sensation of having already been awake. My mind still humming with pieces of the night before, her last comment about people who say no too often, looping like an audio glitch. My alarm had gone off 10 minutes earlier, but I hadn't moved, lying there and tracing cracks in the ceiling paint like a map of bad decisions I wasn't going to make. Outside, the quad was wet from an early drizzle, and the air through the slightly open window had that damp metallic smell of sidewalks still holding yesterday's warmth. Tessa was gone, but her side of the room was a crime scene of half-zipped makeup bags. A cardigan hanging from the back of her chair like someone had abandoned it mid-escape, and the faint thrum of her air purifier that she always left running so the room wouldn't smell like cafeteria food. I sat up slowly, the stone-in-pocket feeling from yesterday settling back in my chest, heavier somehow because I knew now that it wasn't going away. The bursar's office was my first stop between classes. The line was short, just a couple of other students shifting in place, their backpacks bulging with the uneven weight of books and snacks. When I reached the counter, the clerk, an older woman with a gray braid and nails painted a faint lavender, pulled up my account and tilted her head. "Utilities late fee?" "That shouldn't be here," she said, frowning at her monitor. "It's marked under your name as primary on the housing account." I told her I'd never changed it, that our suite had always split everything evenly under the shared login. She clicked, squinted, and then said the thing I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. It was updated on March 30th to auto-pay from your card ending in 4428. That was the day Tessa had leaned over my desk, laptop in hand, saying we should just set it up and be done with it. I asked if the system recorded which IP address had made the change. The clerk's expression tightened. You'd need IT to pull that, she said. We just see the changes and dates. I thanked her, made a note in my incidents doc, and walked out into the drizzle that had turned into something like mist, the kind that gets into your hair without you realizing it. By noon, I was in the dining hall with Nia, who had her laptop open to a simulation program, lines of data running like rain down the screen. Utilities, she said when I told her. That's small scale now, but it's setting you up for a bigger hit later. She's seeing what she can get away with. I told her about the bursar, about needing IT to confirm the IP. Nia chewed her sandwich thoughtfully, then said, You should also request door swipe logs from housing. If she's in your room when you're not, that's a paper trail. I added it to my list, the rows of dates and times growing like a slow-rolling credits list for a movie I didn't want to be in. Classes blurred together that day, but the small irritations had sharp edges. When I went to print an updated draft of my poster captions at Kincaid Library, the printer display flashed insufficient credit. I checked my balance, 0. I'd loaded $15 worth just last week. My account log showed 38 pages printed that morning under my username, all titled Variations of Comms Project Script and TalkingPoints.xxx. I felt the blood rise to my face as I clicked Save Log and emailed it to myself. The date was neat and unshakable. April 18th, 9:42 a.m., while I was in ecology, which runs until 10:15. I imagined her sliding my card through the reader, selecting her file, hitting print without even looking at the credit balance. My hand shook just slightly as I typed the incident into my document. The small cuts kept coming. That afternoon, I stopped by the mailroom to pick up a package, a lab manual for the summer methods course I'd be starting at Rockridge if the interview went well. The attendant checked my box, frowned, and said, This was logged as picked up yesterday. My throat went dry. By who? I asked. He checked his screen. Signature says T. Klein. He turned the monitor so I could see, and there it was. Her name in the neat, rounded letters she used for everything. Did she leave it in the suite? I asked. He shrugged. Not my department. I walked back to Hawthorne Hall with the envelope of anger sealed tight inside me, and when I got to the room, it was sitting on my desk, the flap roughly torn open and taped shut again. I photographed the package from 3 angles and sent it to my email with the subject, Tampered Mail, April 18th. By evening, I realized my days had started to feel like an alternating current, brief stretches of normalcy, then sharp zaps of something that made my stomach drop. I'd come back from lab to find my desk chair moved just enough that its legs didn't match the indentations in the carpet. My USB drive, the one with my Quagga image files, was lying on my bed instead of in the pencil tin where I always left it. Nothing was obviously gone or altered, but the message was the same. I've been here. I've touched this. I can. The first openly hostile move came that Friday night. I was in the laundry room, transferring clothes from washer to dryer, when 2 girls from our floor came in mid-conversation. Did you see that clip? One asked the other. She basically admitted to making up her data. My stomach tightened, but I didn't speak until they turned and saw me. Sorry, I said, pretending I'd just walked in. What clip? They exchanged a glance that was too quick to be casual. Oh, it's going around in a couple group chats, one said. Somebody edited one of your lab TikToks, so it sounds like you're saying your results are fake. I kept my face neutral, though my pulse was loud in my ears. Send it to me, I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. I got it 5 minutes later, a jerky, low-quality video where my voice from an old post had been cut, so I checked my data twice became, I faked my data twice. The caption read, Integrity? We don't know her. I saved it to my phone, along with the metadata. The username that had uploaded it was anonymous, but the background in the clip, our dorm room, her ring light on low, wasn't. When I got back upstairs, Tessa was at her desk, editing something on her second phone. "You've been busy," I said, setting my laundry bag down with deliberate weight. She didn't look up. "Everyone's busy," she said. "It's midterms." I wanted to throw the printed credit log on her desk, the package photo, the utilities change record, the clip. Instead, I walked to my side of the room, plugged in my phone, and pressed record on my pen. "Midterms are about academics," I said, "not about making other people fail." She spun in her chair, smiling with her teeth, but not her eyes. "Failing is relative," she said. "Maybe I'm helping people see who you really are." I let the silence hang just long enough for the mic to catch the tension. That weekend, I started doing something I hadn't wanted to do yet, cross-referencing her public posts with the times my stuff had been accessed or altered. On April 2nd, the day the utilities auto-pay switched to my card, she'd tweeted, "Some people are so bad with money, it's cute." On April 18th, the morning my printer credits disappeared, she'd posted a photo of printed pages with the caption, "Scripts ready." On the day the package was signed out in her name, she'd posted a boomerang of a box being opened, only the label obscured by her hand. None of it was proof on its own. All of it together was starting to look like a map. Dr. Chen noticed something was off the following Monday. We were reviewing my poster layout, her finger tracing the graph lines, when she paused. "You're quieter than usual," she said. I hesitated, then told her about the edited clip, careful to keep my voice even. She listened without interrupting, then said, "You need to protect your work. Save every original file, every email. Back up to multiple locations. If this reaches the department, we'll need to act fast to preserve your standing." She looked at me with the steady calm of someone who has been through storms before. "Ava, don't try to fight this on charm. Fight it on facts." I left the lab that day with my flash drive in my pocket, not my backpack. That night, I scanned my student account statements, my mail logs, my printer usage history, and stored them in a cloud folder labeled Q Evidence. I updated my incident table with the clip metadata, the package photo, the credit log, and every small shift in my room's objects. I sent a copy of the table to my personal email and to a backup account I hadn't used in years. And still, the next morning, she found a way to push further. I came back from class to find my lab coat draped over her chair, a coffee ring staining the left pocket. "Oh," she said when she saw me looking, "I needed something white for a video. It's not like it's a big deal." My hands were shaking before I even touched the coat. I photographed the stain, logged the time, and, without saying a word, hung it back in my closet. She watched me, the way a cat watches a bird just to see what it will do next. What I didn't tell her was that by then, my allies were quietly lining up. Nia had started keeping an eye out for Tessa's movements in the library and dining hall. Luis was noting any comments he overheard about me or my work in his RA log. Even two floor mates who'd been friendly with her had stopped me one evening to say they'd overheard her in the stairwell making plans to make Ava wish she'd kept her mouth shut. The pattern was widening, more voices joining the chorus of quiet witnesses. It was in that widening pattern that I realized something. This wasn't just about her getting into a lab for a comms project or borrowing a few resources. This was about control. About showing she could shape the story of who I was on campus. The sabotage wasn't random. It was deliberate, escalating, and aimed at my academic credibility first, my stability second. And while the small things were frustrating, I could feel the shape of something bigger forming on the horizon, like the shadow of a wave before it crests. That night, I backed up everything again, set my pen mic to charge, and lay in bed listening to her hum softly while scrolling through her phone. The hum had the same cadence as her earlier threats. Light, unassuming, easy to ignore until you really listened. I watched the red charging light blink on the desk and thought, she's testing me, pushing to see where the breakpoint is. What she doesn't know is that I'm already past the point of just defending myself. I'm building the kind of record you can't argue with, the kind that changes the outcome when the wave finally hits. And by the end of that week, it would hit. Only, it wouldn't come the way I expected. It wouldn't even be something I saw right away. It would be something I found in my email one rainy Wednesday afternoon. A message from the Academic Integrity Office with the subject line, "Request for interview regarding irregularities in poster draft." The subject line sat in my inbox like a lit match on dry paper. Request for interview regarding irregularities in poster draft. The word seemed clinical at first glance, but my stomach knew better. This was accusation dressed as inquiry. The sender was the Academic Integrity Office, CCing my department, chair, Professor Dwyer, and a staff coordinator whose name I didn't recognize. The body of the email was polite to the point of being sharp. A request for me to come in on Friday at 10:30 a.m. to clarify certain discrepancies in the preliminary draft of my Quagga poster that had been brought to our attention. No details, no source. Just a line at the end, reminding me that my scholarship required adherence to university integrity policies. My scholarship. The thing keeping me here. I read it 3 times, my eyes scanning for some clue that would explain how something so airtight could suddenly be deemed suspicious. And then I saw the real problem. Not in the email, but in the timing. This was exactly the kind of hit Tessa would want. I forwarded the email to Dr. Chen with the subject urgent, please read, then stared at the screen while my coffee cooled beside me. My mind kept replaying the altered clip that had circulated last week, the one that made it sound like I'd admitted to faking data. If that had been sent anonymously to the Academic Integrity Office alongside my draft, it would be enough to plant a seed. Not proof. But doubt doesn't need proof. It just needs to take root long enough to survive the first watering. Within the hour, Dr. Chen replied, "Come to my office today at 3 p.m. Bring all your drafts, notes, and lab records for the poster. We'll go through everything together before Friday." I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. She wasn't asking if I'd done something wrong. She was preparing me to prove that I hadn't. The rest of the day moved like I was wading through thick water. In ecology, I couldn't focus on logistic regression. My pen tapped against my notebook while my brain built a mental flowchart of all the ways this could spiral. Worst case, a suspension pending investigation. Best case, a formal warning in my file that might still shadow future opportunities. Every time I thought of the Rockridge Wildlife Institute interview, my stomach clenched. The last thing they'd want is an intern under investigation. When I got to Dr. Chen's office, she was already at her desk with 2 stacks of paper, one clean, one marked up with notes in her looping handwriting. "Sit," she said, motioning to the chair opposite her. I laid out my drafts, raw data sheets, annotated bibliographies, even the gel images with date stamps from the lab camera system. She paged through them with methodical precision. "Everything checks," she said finally, tapping the table. "There is nothing here that could constitute misconduct unless someone deliberately misrepresents it." She looked up, her eyes sharp. "Which is what I suspect has happened." She advised me to bring a printed chronological binder to Friday's meeting, every draft, every figure, every raw file, so that my process was transparent. "They can't argue with evidence," she said. When I left her office, the air felt heavier, as though the campus itself knew something was brewing. And then, as if the universe wanted to underline the point, my phone buzzed with a DM from a floor mate. "Saw this going around, thought you should know." Attached was a screenshot of a group chat I wasn't in, where someone had posted, "Word is Ava's getting hauled in for research fraud. Guess the zebra stripes don't match after all." There was a laughing emoji, a popcorn emoji, and 3 people had liked the message. By that evening, the rumor had legs. In the dining hall, I caught fragments as I passed tables. Not even original research, she just pulled it off Wikipedia. Heard she's in trouble with the dean. That's what happens when you think you're smarter than everyone. It was the same tone as before, a casual cruelty that feeds on its own momentum. I could feel the narrative forming around me, the way gossip turns from smoke into weather. The next morning, the damage was more tangible. My email from the poster session coordinator had a single line. We've received a tip about possible attribution issues with your poster. Please confirm that all text and figures are your own work. My throat tightened. I typed a measured response, CCing Dr. Chen, attaching my sources and noting that all work was my own except for properly cited historical photographs. Still, the fact that they were asking meant someone had planted this seed in more than one place. That afternoon, when I went to the lab, my USB drive, labeled in my handwriting, wasn't in the drawer where I'd left it. In its place was a different one, same model, unmarked. My pulse jumped. I plugged it into the lab computer, careful not to open anything automatically. The drive was nearly empty except for a corrupted folder titled Quagga, Poster, Final. I didn't open it. I ejected it, zipped it into a bag, and wrote the time down. When I checked my bag later in the dorm, I found my original USB in an outer pocket I never use. Someone had swapped them long enough to plant something, then returned it. If I'd opened that corrupted file in the lab or on my personal laptop, who knows what could have been altered, or discovered later, by whoever tipped off academic integrity. That night, while I was backing up my files yet again, I heard Tessa in the common area with two of her friends. She wasn't trying to whisper. I mean, if you're gonna cheat, at least be subtle, she said, laughter spilling around the words. One of them asked something I couldn't hear, and Tessa replied, let's just say the quagga isn't the only thing extinct around here. So is her credibility. The laughter that followed was loud enough to carry through the thin wall. I sat at my desk, pen mic running, the sound hitting my chest like hailstones. The next day, a financial blow landed. My bookstore account notified me that my ebook license for Applied Statistical Methods had been returned for a refund of $395, effective immediately. I hadn't returned it. Now I was locked out of the material a week before the midterm. The return was processed through the campus network, again, the same pattern. Not stealing directly, but sabotaging access, creating a chain of mistakes that would slow me down at critical moments. I emailed the bookstore, filed a ticket with IT to pull the access log, and made another incident entry. By Wednesday, the week felt like a siege. I stopped eating in the dining hall because I couldn't stand the sideways glances. My safe spaces, lab, library, my own desk, felt permeable. And yet, beneath the fear, something was solidifying. The more I logged, the more I realized that this wasn't random noise. It was a sequence, a design. Tessa wasn't just chipping away, she was building a case against me in whispers and doctored artifacts, hoping it would all look organic from the outside. Friday came too quickly. I arrived at the academic integrity office with my binder under one arm and a backup flash drive in my pocket. The coordinator, a neat man with wireframe glasses, ushered me into a small conference room where Professor Dwyer and another faculty member sat at the table. They began with formalities, outlining the report they'd received. An anonymous tip alleging data fabrication, supported by a video clip and a file claiming to be my final poster draft. When they showed me the file, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was such a clumsy fake. Whole sections of text were copied from Wikipedia without citations. The graphs pixelated as if screenshotted from somewhere else entirely. The date stamp on the file was April 19th, the day my USB had been swapped. I laid out my real work in chronological order: raw data, lab notes, early drafts with tracked changes, emails with Dr. Chen, and the time-stamped gel images. I explained the USB incident, presenting both drives and the corrupted file. I didn't say Tessa's name, not yet. I stuck to facts, dates, and verifiable events. By the time I finished, the coordinator's notes filled 3 pages. Professor Dwyer nodded slowly. Thank you, Ava. We'll review this alongside the report we received. In the meantime, continue preparing your poster as planned. And if anything else happens, document it and let us know immediately. When I left the building, the air was cold and sharp. I could feel the difference between defending yourself in panic and defending yourself with a record so tight it can't be pried open. But I also knew this wasn't over. The rumors would keep feeding themselves until the truth was undeniable. And Tessa wasn't done. Because when I got back to Hawthorne Hall, there was a note on my desk in looping handwriting I recognized instantly. It read, "Told you people would see the real you. Enjoy the spotlight. No signature, no need for one." I picked it up with 2 fingers, slid it into a plastic evidence sleeve I'd started keeping in my desk, and wrote the date and time on the corner. The pen mic was already charging for tonight. I had the feeling I'd need it before the week was over, and deep down I could sense the wave building towards something bigger. The moment she'd stop hiding behind whispers and come for me in the open. By the time finals week arrived, the air on campus felt electrically charged, as though every hallway and study lounge was vibrating with the tension of too many deadlines and not enough sleep. Hawthorne Hall was quieter than usual. But it wasn't a peaceful kind of quiet. It was the heavy, restless silence of people holding their breath. My schedule was an exercise in precision. Review sessions in the mornings, lab work midday, hours in the library until closing, then back to the dorm to triple-check my quagga poster and make sure every file was backed up twice. Each night I fell asleep to the faint glow of my desk lamp because there was no part of me that trusted darkness in a shared space anymore. And through all of it, the Academic Integrity Office's review hung over me like a pending storm, neither cleared nor escalated, which meant I was in a state of perpetual defense. Wednesday, April 26, 2023, started badly and only got worse. I was sitting in the library at 3:45 p.m., reviewing statistical output for my ecology final, when my email pinged with a message from the department secretary. The subject was Urgent Lab Safety Compliance, and the body said my file was incomplete on the safety training module. If it wasn't resolved by Friday, my eligibility for scholarship renewal would be flagged during the end-of-year review. I knew I'd completed that module. There was even a certificate PDF sitting in my Google Drive with a completion date from January. I called the office immediately, but the secretary said the system showed no record of my training. I packed up my laptop and sprinted across campus to the administrative building, heart pounding, my sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. The rain had picked up, slicking the sidewalks and leaving my hair damp by the time I reached the 3rd floor. After 20 minutes of waiting and several phone calls from the secretary to the IT department, the module suddenly reappeared in my record. "Must have been a glitch," she said, handing me a printed confirmation. But I could tell from the way my stomach twisted that this wasn't a glitch. It was a warning shot. When I finally got back to Hawthorne Hall around 7:40 p.m., I knew something was wrong before I even reached my door. It was slightly ajar, a thin wedge of fluorescent hallway light cutting into the dim common area. My keycard beeped as I pushed it open, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. Sharp, chemical, unmistakable. Acetone. I stepped inside and froze. My poster panels, which I'd printed that afternoon at the campus print center, were spread out on my desk and bed, the glossy paper warped and curling at the edges. The colors had bled in unnatural streaks, turning the once crisp images of quagga coat patterns into smeared watercolor ghosts. The acetone smell was so strong it made my eyes water. Beside the ruined panels was a scrap of paper with 2 words in looping handwriting. Should have listened. Tessa was standing in the doorway between our room and the common area, her expression a study in faux concern. "Oh my God, Ava, what happened?" she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for our suite mates to hear. "Did something spill on them?" Her eyes flicked toward mine with the briefest glint of satisfaction before she looked back at the panels. "That's awful. And right before the session, too." I didn't answer. I just stared at her, the note, the panels, my hands trembling as I set my backpack down. "Someone was in here," I said finally, my voice low. She tilted her head. "Well, the door was unlocked earlier. Maybe a janitor or something." The lie was casual, almost lazy, as if she hadn't just obliterated weeks of work. I walked past her to my desk, pulling my phone from my pocket. The pen mic clipped to my hoodie was already recording, a habit I no longer thought about. I picked up the note with 2 fingers, careful not to smudge it, and slipped it into a plastic sleeve from the evidence kit I kept in my bottom drawer. My mind was already calculating timelines. The print center had closed an hour ago. The session was in less than 48 hours. Reprinting overnight would be expensive, maybe impossible without Dr. Chen's help. Outside in the hallway, 2 of our suite mates had appeared, curiosity pulling them toward the drama. "What's going on?" one of them asked. Before I could speak, Tessa turned and said, "Ava's poster got ruined. Such bad timing, right?" She gave a small, pitying shake of her head, and I knew, absolutely knew, that this was the moment she wanted witnesses for. Not the act, but the aftermath. I called Nia before I even sat down. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me everything," she said. I described the open door, the smell, the panels. "Do you have photos?" she asked. I did. I sent them, along with one of the notes. "We'll figure this out," she said. "But first, you need to email Dr. Chen right now. Tell her exactly what happened, attach the photos, and CC the department chair. Put the time and the fact that the door was ajar in writing. If there's security footage in your hall, request it tonight." The rest of the evening blurred into triage mode. I filed a report with campus security, who promised to review camera coverage, but warned that footage from dorm floors was often spotty. I sent the email to Dr. Chen and Professor Dwyer, keeping my language calm and factual, resisting the urge to accuse without proof. I updated my incident table with every detail, from the exact timestamp of my return to the fact that the acetone smell had lingered for nearly 2 hours. Sometime after midnight, I sat cross-legged on my bed, staring at the warped panels laid out before me. The rain outside had turned into a steady, hard rhythm against the windows, and I could feel the clock ticking down toward the session. I thought about the hours in the lab, the careful layering of data and narrative, the way I'd chosen each image to guide the viewer's understanding of the quagga's extinction story. Now all of it was smeared, distorted, a physical manifestation of what Tessa had been trying to do to my credibility for weeks. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, something cold and clear was taking shape. I replayed the audio from the hoodie mic, Tessa's voice in the doorway, the faux sympathy, the subtle implication that I'd somehow left the door open. It wasn't a confession, but it was a piece of the pattern. And I was done letting her set the pace. If she wanted to escalate, so would I. At 2:14 a.m., I opened a new document titled Final Phase. The first line I typed was, "Collect every piece of evidence into a single, chronological file. Deliver to student conduct and academic integrity simultaneously." The second line, "No more warnings." I didn't know exactly what Friday's session would look like yet, or how much of the truth would come out in front of the right people. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about surviving finals week. This was about ending the story she'd been writing about me before she could finish the last page. And before the sun came up, I'd already set the first step in motion. The morning after the poster sabotage, I woke up with the kind of clarity that doesn't come from rest, but from resolve. My body was heavy with fatigue, but my mind was already making lists before my eyes even opened. This wasn't going to be another week of scrambling after the messes Tessa left in her wake. This time, I was going to get ahead of her. The ruined panels, the acetone smell, the open door. These weren't just incidents anymore. They were evidence. I just had to treat them as such, compile them in a way no reasonable person could ignore, and put them in front of the right decision makers before she could twist the story further. I started with my allies. At 8:02 a.m., I texted Nia. "Meeting in the library at 9. Bring your laptop." She replied instantly, "On my way." "Coffee?" I sent her a thumbs up. Then I messaged Luis, our RA. "Need to talk about an official report. It's time to log everything." He agreed to meet after lunch. The last message went to Dr. Chen, letting her know I'd be sending her a compiled incident report and asking if she could help me set up a meeting with the Student Conduct Office. Her reply came within minutes. "Yes, keep everything factual and documented. I'll back you." By the time Nia arrived, I had the campus Wi-Fi login screen up on my laptop and a thick manila folder on the table. Inside were printouts of my incidents document, screenshots of messages, photos of the damaged poster, copies of Bursar records, and the Academic Integrity Office email. "This is a lot," Nia said, eyes widening as she flipped through. "But it's solid. We just have to organize it so no one can claim it's circumstantial." She pulled out her laptop and started building a spreadsheet with columns for date, time, location, description, type of evidence, and potential witnesses. I read each entry aloud while she typed, cross-referencing with the files I'd saved in my cloud folder. The further we went, the more undeniable the pattern became. April 2nd, Utilities autopay switched to my card without consent. Bursar logs and email confirmation attached. April 12th, direct verbal threat in the hallway, audio file and timestamp logged. April 18th, package with lab manual signed out by Tessa. Mailroom signature sheet scanned. April 19th, printer credits drained for comms project scripts. Library print log screenshot. April 20th, edited clip circulated implying data fabrication. Video file metadata preserved. April 26th, poster destroyed with acetone, photos, physical note in evidence sleeve, RA notified. 35 entries in total, each tied to either a file, a witness, or both. Luis joined us at 1 o'clock, sliding into the chair across from me. "I've been noting down anything I hear on the floor about you," he said, pulling a small notebook from his backpack. "Mostly it's gossip, but a few times I've overheard her saying things that cross a line." He read aloud one from April 14th. "She's not going to make it to the end of the semester without breaking." Another from April 25th. "It's almost too easy to make her look guilty." He offered to write a statement summarizing his observations and sign it with the date. That, combined with his RA log entries, would give the reports an official timestamp. The next step was digital forensics. I emailed the IT help desk to request login and access logs for my student account, citing suspected unauthorized use. I also asked for the IP address associated with the utilities portal change and the ebook license return. They couldn't guarantee same-day turnaround, but the student tech specialist I spoke to hinted that if those changes happened on campus, the IPs would match a specific building's network. And if it was Hawthorne Hall, we'd be one step closer to proving proximity. By late afternoon, my evidence binder was taking shape. I bought a sturdy 3-inch binder and a pack of colored tabs from the campus bookstore. Red for financial tampering, blue for academic sabotage, green for property damage, yellow for verbal threats, purple for digital harassment. I printed everything on plain white paper and slid each sheet into a protective sleeve. The audio files got QR codes that linked to cloud-hosted copies. I labeled each with the date, time, and a short description. I wanted the presentation to be so airtight that flipping through it would feel less like reading my account and more like reading a formal investigative file. Dr. Chen called at 5:30, her voice steady but urgent. "I've secured you a preliminary meeting with the head of student conduct for Monday, May 1st. That's before your academic integrity review wraps up. If we show them the full picture now, they can consider all of it together." She paused, then added, "Ava, this is exactly why we document. Once it's in writing and supported, it's not just a complaint, it's a case." I spent the evening cross-checking everything against the university's student conduct code. Section 2.1.3 covered harassment, threats, and intimidation. Section 2.3.2 listed tampering with or unauthorized use of another's property. Section 2.5.4 addressed misrepresentation of academic work. Every single one of those violations had a match in my binder. I highlighted the relevant policy excerpts and placed them in the front section so the committee wouldn't have to hunt for the rules she'd broken. Around 10 p.m., as I was labeling the final tabs, Tessa breezed into the room, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke masked with vanilla perfume. She glanced at the open binder on my desk, her eyes narrowing just enough to register. "Wow," she said lightly. "Are you scrapbooking your semester?" I didn't look up. Just keeping records, I said, my tone even. She smirked. That's cute. You think anyone cares about your little charts? I pressed the pen mic clip to my collar, making sure it caught every word. Once she disappeared into the bathroom, I slipped my phone from my pocket and texted Nia. She knows I'm building something. That's good. It means she's nervous. Nia replied, keep her talking. The more she tries to get in your head, the more slips you'll catch. The following day, I met with the campus police liaison, a middle-aged officer named Daniels who handled theft and property damage reports for student cases. I handed him the evidence sleeve with the acetone-stained note, explaining how it had been found with the damaged poster. He examined it without touching the paper inside. You've preserved this well, he said. I'll file it as part of an ongoing malicious mischief investigation. If you get restitution through conduct, great. If not, this will help if you want to pursue charges. His matter-of-fact tone reassured me more than I expected. It made the whole thing feel less like a personal vendetta and more like something that could be measured, proven, resolved. By Friday night, the binder was complete. It opened with a one-page executive summary. 35 documented incidents between March 27th and April 26th, 2023, involving harassment, academic sabotage, property damage, and financial tampering by Tessa Klein. The second page was a timeline, the third a table of contents keyed to the color-coded tabs. Each tab section began with a brief narrative explaining the category, followed by evidence in chronological order. The final section contained signed witness statements from Nia, Luis, and 2 floormates who'd overheard threats in the stairwell. I sat on my bed with the binder beside me, its weight a strange comfort. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't just reacting. I had built something she couldn't wave away with a laugh or a lie. And when Monday came, I'd walk into that meeting not as the girl trying to convince people she wasn't guilty, but as the student proving beyond doubt who had been guilty all along. Still, I knew better than to think she'd stop here. If anything, the closer I got to putting this in front of the right people, the more desperate she might become. As I turned off the desk lamp and let the room go dark, I caught a faint reflection in the window. My own face, eyes steady, jaw set. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was preparing for the moment she'd be confronted with everything she'd done, with no way out but the truth. What I didn't know was how quickly that moment was going to come, or how, when it did, the room where it happened would hold more people, more proof, and more consequences than she'd ever imagined. The morning of Friday, May 12th, 2023, dawned unseasonably bright, the kind of sunlight that makes even the oldest brick buildings on campus look sharper, cleaner, like someone turned the saturation up a notch. But I barely noticed it through the fog of my own focus. This was it. Hearing day. The Student Conduct Committee had scheduled me for a 2 p.m. session in room 214 of the administration building, a space I'd walked past 100 times but never had reason to enter. My binder sat on my desk, zipped neatly into my bag alongside a spare USB with every file mirrored and backed up. I had spent the night before rehearsing the order of my presentation, not just the evidence, but how I'd introduce each piece, where I'd pause, when I'd let the committee see the timestamps for themselves. Nia insisted on walking with me to the building, saying she'd wait outside until it was over. Luis had already submitted his signed witness statement earlier in the week, but he texted me that morning. You've got this. Keep it calm. Keep it factual. Dr. Chen had gone one step further. She'd rearranged her schedule so she could be present in the room as a faculty witness. Knowing she would be there steadied me more than I wanted to admit. When I arrived, the hallway outside 214 was quiet except for the low murmur of voices from behind the heavy wooden door. At exactly 1:58 p.m., the committee chair, a tall woman in a navy blazer with an expression that gave nothing away, stepped out and called my name. Inside, the room was arranged with a long rectangular table, 3 committee members on one side, 2 chairs for witnesses on the other, and a single chair at the end where I was directed to sit. A small recorder on the table clicked on as the chair read the official opening statement into the record. The proceedings began with the committee reviewing the allegations. Multiple incidents of harassment, academic sabotage, property damage, and digital tampering, all attributed to Tessa Klein. They noted that Tessa had been informed of the hearing and invited to attend. My pulse jumped when I saw her enter a moment later, expression carefully blank, hair slicked back in a way that made her look more severe than usual. She slid into the seat opposite mine without acknowledging me, her hands folded on the table. The chair invited me to begin. I opened my binder to the executive summary and passed copies to each committee member, along with a printed index of evidence. Over the past 6 weeks, I began, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. I have documented 35 separate incidents involving direct threats, unauthorized use of my accounts, tampering with my property and academic materials, and dissemination of false information about my work. I explained my color-coded system, then moved into the first category, financial tampering. I showed the Bursar logs proving the utility's auto-pay change, then the bookstore account statement showing the unauthorized ebook return, each cross-referenced with the IT access logs that had since been pulled. Next came academic sabotage. I projected the print credit log onto the wall screen, highlighting the comms project documents printed under my account while I was in class. I played a short clip from the altered video that had circulated, then presented the original unedited footage for comparison. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. When I reached the property damage section, I slid the acetone-stained poster photos across the table, followed by the physical note preserved in its evidence sleeve. The chemical smell was long gone, but the warped panels in the photos made the act feel immediate again. I let the images speak for themselves before moving on to the audio recordings. Short, pointed excerpts from my pen mic files. Tessa's voice, in her own tone and cadence, saying, "If you don't learn to share, I'll destroy your future." Another. "It's almost too easy to make her look guilty." And the one in the laundry room? "If you weren't so weird about territory, people wouldn't think you're hiding something." Each clip was time-stamped and corroborated with either a witness statement or a corresponding incident in my log. Dr. Chen testified next, confirming the integrity of my research process and the legitimacy of my Quagga poster data. She described how she had reviewed my drafts, raw data, and lab notes over the course of the UMRI semester, and how the corrupted final file submitted anonymously to the Academic Integrity Office bore no resemblance to the work I'd been producing. Her calm, precise language was a scalpel, cutting away any suggestion of misconduct on my part. Luis followed, reading from his prepared statement about overhearing Tessa's comments in the stairwell and noting the multiple times he had been told by other residents that she was trying to get Ava in trouble. 2 floormates, both visibly uncomfortable, also confirmed they had heard Tessa make similar remarks, including one instance where she implied she had access to things that would make Ava's semester a nightmare. When it was Tessa's turn to respond, she started with denial. She claimed she had never accessed my accounts, touched my belongings, or altered my work. She said the audio clips were taken out of context, and that she had been venting about general frustrations, not making actual threats. But when the committee pressed her about the IP address logs matching Hawthorne Hall's network at the exact times of the utilities change and ebook return, her explanation faltered. I don't know how that happened," she said, glancing down at her folded hands. The final crack came when one committee member asked about the note found with the ruined poster. "It's not my handwriting," Tessa said quickly. But when shown a sample of her writing from a recent dorm sign-up sheet, the similarities were impossible to miss. The same looping S, the same curling tail on the final N. The room was quiet except for the sound of the chair's pen scratching across her notes. After nearly 2 hours, the chair announced that the committee had sufficient evidence to proceed with deliberations. Tessa was excused first, then me. Outside the room, Nia stood up from the bench where she'd been waiting and pressed a coffee into my hand. "How'd it go?" she asked. I said slowly, "it went exactly how it needed to." 2 hours later, I received the official decision by email. The findings were unequivocal. Multiple violations of the Student Conduct Code, including harassment, academic sabotage, and property damage. Sanctions included an immediate no-contact order, interim suspension from campus housing, disciplinary probation for the remainder of her enrollment, mandatory completion of an ethics workshop, and restitution for documented damages totaling $612. The findings and sanctions would be noted in her permanent record. That evening, at the department's poster session, I stood beside my reprinted Quagga display, rebuilt in just under 48 hours thanks to Dr. Chen's help, and tried to let myself feel the moment. Students, faculty, and even a few local reporters milled around, asking questions about the genetic analysis and historical context. When they announced the awards at the end of the night, my name was called for Best Undergraduate Poster. The applause was warm, steady, grounding. I shook hands, smiled for photos, and let the recognition settle over me like sunlight after weeks of storm. But as I walked back to Hawthorne Hall, award ribbon tucked into my bag, I knew this wasn't the final chapter. Tessa had been stopped in the formal sense, but the real victory would be in what came next. How I rebuilt my life here without the shadows she'd cast, and how I made sure the record we'd assembled stayed strong enough to outlast her lies. And though I didn't know it yet, the aftermath would bring its own challenges, some in the form of apologies I never expected, and others in the lingering question of how to live when the fight you've been waging is finally over. In the days after the hearing, campus life moved on with the strange, indifferent rhythm that only a university in May can have. Students lugging laundry bags to their cars, friends sprawled on the quad taking graduation photos, professors balancing final grading with early summer travel plans. But for me, there was a shift in the air that I could feel in my bones. It wasn't relief exactly, not yet. But the oppressive weight I'd been carrying for weeks was gone. I could breathe without scanning for the next blow. I could walk into my room without wondering what I'd find moved, broken, or missing. The no-contact order meant that if Tessa saw me, she had to turn and leave. The interim suspension from housing had been enacted immediately after the hearing, and by Sunday morning, her side of the room was stripped bare. The space looked oddly smaller without her ring light and clothes rack, as though her absence had made the air collapse inward. I spent that Sunday cleaning. I vacuumed every inch of the carpet, scrubbed down the desk with disinfectant wipes, and repinned my corkboard with fresh pushpins, straight lines replacing the chaotic tangle it had become in the past month. My reprinted Quagga poster hung above my desk, like both a trophy and a scar. It was the same project, but I could still see the ghost of the one she'd destroyed in my memory. I told myself that was good. Some reminders shouldn't fade too quickly. By Monday, the apologies began trickling in. First from the two floor mates who'd overheard Tessa in the stairwell but hadn't said anything until the hearing. They found me in the dining hall and slid into the booth awkwardly. "We should have spoken up sooner," one of them said, her eyes fixed on the tabletop. "We didn't think it would get that bad." I nodded. "It's done now," I said, which was the closest I could get to forgiveness without lying. Later that afternoon, I ran into Marissa from 3B, the same one who'd stood beside Tessa in the laundry room during one of her early jabs. She hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to say, I believed her at first. I'm sorry for that." I looked at her for a moment, weighing my words. "The truth has a way of getting through," I said. "Sometimes it just takes longer than we want." The support I hadn't expected came from faculty. Dr. Chen stopped by my desk in the lab with a small envelope. Inside was a congratulatory note from the department and a $500 award for my research, in recognition of academic excellence and resilience. Professor Dwyer sent an email encouraging me to apply for a departmental research assistantship in the fall, which came with a tuition waiver for one course. For the first time all semester, my future here didn't feel like something I had to defend. It felt like something I could build. And then there was Rockridge. I had my virtual interview the Tuesday after the hearing, still half-wired from everything that had happened. They asked about my field interests, my data management skills, and my experience with historical DNA samples. When they asked about challenges I'd faced in my work, I took a breath and told them about the poster sabotage. Not in detail, but enough to frame it as a lesson in preparation, redundancy, and professional perseverance. The director leaned forward in his chair and said, "That's the kind of grit we need in the field." By Thursday, the offer email was in my inbox. A paid summer position with rotation through the lab, data analysis, and a field site in Colorado. I reread it 3 times before letting myself believe it was real. Financially, the restitution from Tessa hit my account the following week. $612, reimbursed for the damaged poster materials, the returned ebook license, and the lab manual she'd tampered with. It wasn't a huge sum in the grand scheme of things, but it was money I could now use toward travel costs for Rockridge and replacing the USB drives I no longer trusted. More than the amount, it was the principle. She had to pay, in a tangible way, for what she'd done. But the changes that mattered most weren't on paper. I learned quickly how to set boundaries so wide and clear they were impossible to mistake. I stopped letting people borrow my accounts, devices, or workspace, no matter how innocent the request sounded. I locked my desk drawer even when I went to the bathroom. I said no without adding softeners like, "sorry," or "maybe later." It was amazing how fast people adapted when you stopped leaving cracks for them to slip through. I also started saying yes more to the things that nourished me. Nia and I took long walks along the Olentangy River Trail in the evenings, letting the rush of the water drown out the echoes of the past few weeks. I joined a weekly campus birding group, partly for my biology credits and partly because there's something healing about looking at the world through binoculars instead of suspicion. I even started working on a side project with Dr. Chen, a short paper on best practices for preserving research integrity under resource-limited conditions, using the Quagga poster experience as an anonymized case study. Still, there were moments when the quiet felt too sharp, like I was waiting for another shoe to drop. One afternoon in June, I passed Tessa on the opposite side of the quad. She was walking with 2 friends, her hair pulled back, sunglasses covering her eyes. She didn't look at me, didn't break stride, but I felt the brief prickle of old tension in my shoulders. And then it was gone, replaced by something lighter. An understanding that she no longer had access to my life, my space, or my story. The record we'd built at the hearing was a wall she couldn't climb. As the semester ended, I packed my dorm room for the summer with a different energy than I'd moved in with. My boxes were labeled neatly, my desk drawers empty except for the pen mic, which I decided to keep, not because I planned to use it, but because it reminded me that self-protection is a skill worth holding onto. On my last night in Hawthorne Hall, I stood in the doorway and looked at the room one last time. It felt smaller, but also safer, like I'd reclaimed it in some way. Before I left, I sat down to record a final entry, not for evidence, but for myself. "If you're hearing this," I said into my phone, "you made it through. You didn't let her rewrite your life. You held your ground, and when the time came, you had the receipts. That's what saved you." I ended the recording there, not because I didn't have more to say, but because it was enough. I don't know if I'll ever cross paths with Tessa again, in person or online, but if I do, I know I won't feel that sinking, powerless dread anymore. I've seen what she's capable of, and I've seen what I'm capable of in response. I've learned that self-worth isn't something other people get to grant or take away. It's something you protect fiercely, document thoroughly, and carry forward, even when the fight is over. As I boarded the bus for Rockridge, the Ohio spring sliding into early summer outside the window, I thought about how the Quagga's story had started as a tragedy of erasure, how a species can vanish when no one is paying attention to the small, early losses. My story could have gone that way too, if I'd stayed silent, if I'd let her frame the narrative. But I hadn't. And now, no matter what comes next, I know that when the record matters, I'll make sure it's the right one.